Now, the 2026 regulation changes are very close to us, but it seems like there'll be some modifications that will benefit the teams that are able to extract more effective downforce out of their cars. However, the FIA made sure to fix one very important issue in this area that emerged from the team's simulators, and by doing so, they've likely prevented a very weird trend of seeing cars spin as they accelerate on the straight of the track. But with lots of new additions, such as the override mode, will the drivers be forced to compensate performance for durability? And more importantly, will these tweaks actually help in the aerodynamic balance of the car? It's safe to assume that many are eagerly waiting for the 2026 regulations, mostly because they're going to bring the factor of excitement, as the downforce of the cars was supposed to be reduced by 40%, and the majority of the performance would have come from the engine and the bigger electrification process, one that will double itself to 350 kilowatt hours of output. But with the latter option still possible, some of the concerns that were raised by Red Bull were labelled as unfounded by the remainder of the grid due to the fact that the rules are the same for everybody, with Horner being adamant that the current regulations, without any tweaks, are going to do nothing more than produce Frankenstein type of cars, with the challenges being ugly and failed experiments of the new era. Now, one of the factors that's undergone changes is the movable aerodynamic characteristic, which has been done in order to increase the car's performance and help it accommodate the characteristics of the new turbo hybrid engines that feature a 50-50 split between the internal combustion engine, or ICE, and the battery. The idea is that the wings of the cars will be able to run in a high downforce configuration in the corners, the places where they need it the most, in order to help with the higher requirements of tyre grip before they go on to shift to a low drag configuration on the straights to help them with straight line speed. However, one of the paths that was being explored was to make the rear wing movable only, which was more or less labelled as the Fangio car model in the simulators, and some of the concerning characteristics of the cars emerged while doing so. According to close sources of the F1 teams, when the rear wing was appointed at its most low drag configuration and the engine was at full power, the car was reaching a point of non-drivability, with many examples of the drivers spinning on the straights while accelerating the car or being unable to take the smallest of curves without having the rear end snap. The disbalance was achieved thanks to a shift in the aero balance, which is one of the biggest shifts that's been made in recent history, and it was estimated to be 3 times as much as it's currently experienced with a wide open DRS, which is already too much of an advantage for teams that have a great aerodynamic balance on their car. The situation has gone to the extent of one F1 insider suggesting that the only way to fix this issue, without adding any tweaks to the current rules, is to drive in such a conservative manner on the main straights that the lap times would effectively be slower than the lower bracket competition, Formula 2, which is not where the sport wants to move by any chance. Apart from this, there are a lot of other changes that the FIA has agreed upon, such as the 355 km/h KERS-style override boost system, which would allow the drivers to use a high-speed mode in order to fully maximize the energy deployment power unit map from 2026 onwards. Of course, this would have only added further to the problem of having a non-drivable car on the straights while accelerating, because if the driver was to use this system while trying to overtake, it would only add more power to the shorter and lighter cars, and that would make them spin much more easily while the drivers would look like amateurs in the process. However, with the massive importance being placed on the hybrid aspect of the power unit from 2026 onwards, this override system won't be usable at any given moment for the driver, and if the drivers want to use it when they please, they would have to put up with the risk of being in an energy deficit under normal deployment conditions further around the lap, or over the course of the next few laps, which would effectively make them a sitting duck for the drivers behind him. The initial goal of this system is to further boost the wheel-to-wheel racing from 2026 onwards, something that, if we're not to look at the number one driver on the grid, is becoming more and more available to watch, with the difference that the thrill is nowhere near close to what we envisioned in 2021, for example. And with the chassis changes coming on the grid, the wheelbase will be trimmed down to 3,400mm from the current 3,600mm, making the cars narrower by 10 cm along the way. Therefore, the movable aero being present on the rear wing only goes to show that there are a lot of question marks that the FIA had to answer, and in order to debunk all of them, they had to see what the teams were talking about when elaborating about the worrying simulated trends from their headquarters. There were a lot of FIA representatives who visited different team facilities in order to see with their own eyes what kind of issues they're going to deal with, and it seems like an agreement has been reached. The movable aero plan won't work if it's implemented on the rear wing only. It needs to be applied to the front wing as well. Therefore, the governing body of the sport decided that the 2026 aero plan, which again is vastly focused on reducing the dependence on the driver on the aerodynamics of the car and putting his talent on display, will need to incorporate the front wing as well. This would make both of the wings move in conjunction with each other, and it will help massively in the process of having the cars deliver the performance that the original plans for the 2026 regulations had it mapped out for the FIA. If the governing body's experts are assured that the two wings work together, it should help in reducing the aero balance offset that's been causing all of these issues in the simulator. And one of the happiest members on the grid right now regarding this question is Christian Horner. It's obvious that Red Bull expects to be the heaviest affected team with a reduction of downforce, so any help in this regard helps a lot because it would inevitably put the power back in their hands, or at least help them keep the advantage from the current era. When talking about these changes in the aero segment, Horner went on to say, "We're waiting for the chassis regulations, which will be a fundamental part of the 2026 package now, and how that interacts with these power units. The various working groups are working hard on that, and it's important that we conclude something in the near future. The rules are the same for everybody at the end of the day, so it's how you apply them and translate them. I don't think we're afraid of whatever the rules will be, as it's the same starting point for everybody." However, Red Bull are entering the 2026 season fully independent with their power unit, also known as the Red Bull powertrain, as it will be badged by Ford. So while they're working on this project currently by borrowing the intellectual property from Honda, having their Japanese partner move to Aston Martin is a big risk that could see them lose a lot of the advantage they've gained in the past couple of years. So it's no secret that a lot of questions have been raised about the engine that Red Bull will produce on their own, because they're not the most famous team when it comes to building engines in Formula 1. As a matter of fact, they've been the customer team up until now, and 2026 is the first year in which they're entering a new season, let alone a regulation era, in which they will be fully responsible for how the engine behaves. When talking about this matter to a greater extent, Max Verstappen made sure to give positive comments about the engine despite all the fuss going around it, and how it's not good enough and is falling behind its rivals. Furthermore, the three-time world champion went on to say, "We know that 2026 is a big task for us, and we don't take that lightly. And of course, with so many well-established engine manufacturers, we also don't think it's going to be easy to beat them. But we've got a lot of good people working on the project, and we're very excited about it. So, time will tell, of course, where we're going to be with this project in the first place." Well, with all this in mind, do you think that the new aero change will help the common goal of having a closer racing nature from 2026 onwards? And more importantly, do you think that we'll see a switch in the pecking order? Let us know in the comments down below.